Well, welcome everyone. Welcome. We've got clients and friends and advisors and professional folks on this call. So I just want to welcome everyone to make sure you are tuning into the right webinar today. This is Creative Financial and Estate Planning for People Without Children. So single people and couples thinking creatively about their planning. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Catherine Wakefield, who is an estate planning attorney and advanced planning attorney with Mass Mutual. And together we are going to share ideas about estate and financial planning. Hopefully by the end of this hour, you will either feel like, ooh, that's something I never thought of before, or that's something I've been thinking about and just haven't done it yet. And hopefully this call will prompt you to get into action. We will open up for questions towards the end. We've got about 10 minutes left at the end. We'll open up for questions, so you'll be able to unmute and ask a question, or as we're talking, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll answer them as we go. But if anyone has a question that's really personal, that's pertaining to your unique situation that you do not want to ask on a recorded call that will be available to the public, feel free to reach out to either of us or both of us, and we're happy to take your question offline and answer it separately from this call today. So I'll just have Anna put our emails in the chat so you have them, and we will get started. I want to begin today with a story to just set the stage for what we're talking about. This was several years ago. I had a client who was a single woman in her early 80s. She and her sister had lived together, and her sister had passed away. And so she inherited all of her sister's assets and her own. And neither of them were ever married. Both of them had no children. And so there was some substantial money for her in the end. She had two nephews who lived far away and had barely any contact with her except for Christmas. And she had an incredible neighborhood. She had the guy who mowed her lawn and did her snow removal. She had the woman next door who took her to the bank every Friday and took her to her grocery shopping. She had another friend who picked her up for church every Sunday. And she had this amazing community of friends who took such good care of her for years and years after her sister had passed. So I was meeting with her to review her financial plan, go through her investments, and have a conversation about beneficiaries. And I said to her, as we're looking at how much incredible effort your neighbors are putting into helping you and taking care of you, I can't help but notice that you're 100% beneficiary of all of your assets and your life insurance is 50-50 to your two nephews. And I said, is that your intention? And she said to me, now this is 80 something, sophisticated person. She said to me, I thought you had to leave your money to family. And I said, no. I said, you can leave your money to anyone. And she said, well, my goodness, if that's the case, then if you don't have to be related to the people, then I definitely want to think about this differently. So in the end, there were 8 neighbors that she named as beneficiary, and 10% to each of them, 10% to each of her nephews. So 80% of her net worth ended up going to the people who took great care of her in the end and not defaulting to relative because they were relatives. So I just want you to think about this today as we're brainstorming about creative ways to look at your planning in your lifetime as well as when you're no longer here. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine. We're going to begin with the basics of estate planning. We're going to kind of build on it from there.
And what a wonderful story. Thank you, Amy. It's just such a great way to get started with this because that just leads so nicely into the estate planning conversation of documents that you may need. So there are some documents that everybody needs to have who is 18 and over. And there are two of those are documents you need to have while you're alive. And one of those is your will. And we'll talk about the different ones. But let's start with the healthcare proxy. For everybody on this call who is 18 or over, and I'm assuming that's all of us, just a guess, that you need to have this document. A healthcare proxy, what this does is it determines who is in charge of your medical needs if you can't make a decision for yourself. Now, this is not end-of-life care. That is called a living will. That is completely different. They could be combined into the same document, but this is a very separate, distinct part of the document or even separate document. And this is assuming you will recover. This is a short-term something where you are unable to make a decision, whether it's due to an accident, due to anesthesia, twilight, uh, dentist having a mouth stuffed with cotton while they're drilling your teeth. Anytime you can't speak for yourself, literally or figuratively, a healthcare proxy is going to come into play. So with a healthcare proxy, it is a state-specific document. If you have moved states since you have done your documents, it is a great time to look at your healthcare proxy. You want to look at who you've named. Is this somebody that lives near you? Is this somebody that can meet you at whatever facility you find yourself in? Or is this somebody you haven't talked to in a while and it's just a relative? Is there contact information? One of the biggest things that I see is that it will name, let's say I name Amy, right? But it doesn't put her contact information. How is an emergency person going to find Amy quickly, especially if this happens to me and I'm halfway across the country on a trip somewhere? How are they going to know what state to look in, what town to look in, and how to contact her? It's a much better idea to put in Amy who lives at this address with this phone number versus just her name. So if your document does not have that, it is a great reason to go back, look at your document, and decide whether it's worth updating it to add in names, address, phone number to make it easier for someone to find you or someone to find your loved ones that you've named. The next thing you're going to look at here is who you've named with that healthcare proxy. And is this person going to be able to make clear, thoughtful decisions in the event that you are unable to make decisions for yourself? And is the way I used to say it when I was in private practice is this someone you want to wake up at 2 a.m. with bad news? Right. So I had a gentleman I was working with who was in his 70s and he named his mom, who was 94, and she lived in an assisted living facility, but she was his closest person. And fine, that's wonderful. But when I asked him the question of, do you want to wake her up at 2 a.m. with bad news? And he said, oh my gosh, of course not. And I said, well, then you probably need to pick somebody else as your healthcare proxy. So I tell you guys that because that's something you want to think about. Ask yourself, is the person you have named, first, do you remember who you named if you have one of these? Second, is the contact info there? And third, is this somebody you want to wake up at 2 a.m. with bad news? If one or more of those things is a no, you probably want to look at your documents and even consider redoing them. One of the nice things with a healthcare proxy is every state has one, almost every state that I've looked at anyway, has one on their state website that's free. You can download it, fill it in, print it out, get it notarized, and you're done. It's not something you necessarily need an attorney to do unless you want it specialized to you, or you're doing it as part of an update for all of your documents. And we'll talk about that. The next thing you want to look at is your power of attorney. This is everything other than your healthcare. This is who makes a decision for you with all your finances, any bills, anything you need to make a decision on that requires your signature, either e-signature, password, or even just a wet signature or something that you handwrite. Anything like that is going to be a financial power of attorney. The question here is, do you have one that starts when you are incapacitated or when you are inconvenienced? And this is a big distinction because a legal definition of incapacity can take an awful lot longer to get than just being inconvenienced. So if you have something called a durable power of attorney, what that means is somebody can act on your behalf the minute you sign it. It does not mean that they can go into your accounts and do funny things to your accounts while you're still competent. Because what's going to happen is if they try to use that power of attorney, they have to prove that you're not able to be there to make that decision. So the first phone call would be to you from the bank or financial institution. Hey, did you authorize this? If the answer is no, they're not going to allow them to do it. That's durable. So that starts the day it happens. So that's where if you're inconvenienced. So the example I always give is if you go overseas and you lose your wallet. You need some money to get back into the country. How do you get money from a US bank if you're overseas? You need a US power of attorney to do it. Somebody standing on US soil. That's not being incapacitated. That's a legal definition where you're disabled or you're completely unable to act for yourself. That is just being thoroughly inconvenienced, right? You lost your wallet. This stinks. How do I get money? That's inconvenience. So if you want to have somebody able to act no matter what the scenario is and not wait for that legal definition of being incapacitated, it's durable. If you don't want anyone to have access, it's general. So if you have a document already, it's a good idea to look at it and see what it says. Because if you're listening to me talk and you're thinking, geez, I love the idea that somebody could act if this happens to me, if I travel internationally and I need something, and your document says general, wouldn't it be better to know that now and be able to fix it? So as we talk through these documents, I'm going to give you things to look at if you have them, and if not, things to think about as you start to create your own or work with an attorney to create them. So those are your two living documents. Those are the things that you should absolutely have. And one of the things, the last thing I'll say about power of attorney, there's something called digital assets. If your powers of attorney are over, let's say, 5 or 6 years old, maybe some cutting edge attorneys, even as old as 8 or 9 years, this might be in there. What this is somebody who can act on behalf for all things online: email, social media, photo share, cryptocurrency, any bill pay online, anything you do online. This person needs to have digital assets access as your power of attorney to do these things for you. So look and see if that's in your documents as well. If it's not, again, something to talk with your attorney about and your advisor to see if that's worth adding.
I'm just going to interrupt you because this just
Please
reminds
do.
me. We talk about digital assets, and this is, a fairly new concept. But we had a client who was in her 70s, single, and with adult children, and it was very important to her that she had a friend who would be her power of attorney if something happened to her, not to take care of her social media and her digital assets, but to make sure that that her friend shut down all of her dating sites because she didn't want her children to see them. And so it was a very private thing to her. And in her lifetime, she's handling it. But if something happened to her, she has a non family member to shut all of them down so her children did not have access to that.
That is wonderful.
You just don't know.
You absolutely don't. And what a great story. And you know what? Yes. And to piggyback on that for a second, passwords can be a really powerful thing to leave to somebody. If you do give them digital access to your assets, you also want to potentially give them access to your passwords, which means considering an online password keeper or some place where you keep all of your passwords locked in a vault of some kind in one place where somebody needs one password to get in, and then that gives them access to everything else. That can be a great option to have. And then all you need to do is give this person access to that one password versus doing what my parents have done for years, which is a lined piece of paper, crossing out the old password and writing in the new one, which probably means it's going to be very interesting for my sister or I down the road, because I'm sure it's not completely up to date. But that being said, that would be a better way to go about it. So making sure someone knows your intentions while you're alive, and oh my goodness, the dating site piece, and while after you've passed away as well, and making sure someone knows what your intentions are going to be. That is a personal representative. So you've now passed. Personal representative takes care of all of your personal wishes, shuts down access to all of your financial life, everything, and they use your will to help them do it. So the will is the third document that, in my opinion, everybody should have. Because if you don't have a will, the state will create one for you. And what happens then is that you lose control over how your assets are distributed. For example, if you have a spouse, you would have everything automatically go to that spouse if you don't have a will. If you have a spouse and siblings, it may get distributed differently depending on the state. So if it could also go back up to your parents' generation, there's all kinds of different possible configurations, and none of them might be what you want. So the idea is for you to have control for yourself, and to have that control, you need to create documents that says what you want, not what the state wants you to want for yourself. I just trip over my tongue when I say that part because that's a mouthful. So you want to look at what you're putting in your will. So we talked about the need to have one, the need to make it important. An ethical will is what we say when you actually want to not just pass your assets, but pass your assets with additional guidelines for your personal representative and for your loved ones. You can add what's called a letter of intent or a letter of intention, where you write your documents, who's getting what, how, when, but you're also adding in your wishes for how your heirs get things, what control you'd like to have, how you'd like them to spend your money, any guidelines you'd like to provide, what your values are. So depending on who you have as the personal representative, there's no guessing. This person just says, I know you. And if I don't, I'm going to look at what you've written and I'm going to determine who gets what when based on that. So it provides clarity and it provides somebody who wants to connect the dots between your wishes, potentially a trust, and your plan.
We had a client a couple of years ago. His great uncle died, and there's 23 cousins in the family. And he left a letter of intent that said, I'm leaving $5,000 to each of the 23 of you. You can do whatever you want with the money, but I would love, in my honor, if you would have a family reunion in Germany and kind of go back to our land. And all 23 cousins agreed to do this. And they had the most incredible, meaningful event that none of them had to pay for because it was the uncle's wishes. But they would never have known that had he not left that letter to them. And he said it was just so, so special to be able to follow through on his wishes and that everybody followed through.
It's really cool that they did it too, because that's such a, it's so wonderful that that was something
Mhm.
they did. I love that. And power of attorney, personal representative are incredibly important positions in your life. And it's something that you should be deciding with your advisor. And it's not something the attorney should just automatically say, assuming you're, let's assume you're married for a moment. Let's just automatically assume we're going to name your spouse. Well, your spouse may, you may be the one in your family, if you're married, that pays the bills, or if you're in a relationship that pays all the bills, that handles all the finances, and your spouse does lots of other things, but not the financials. So if you name your spouse who doesn't know the financials, or your partner, power of attorney and executor or personal representative, they now not only have to learn all the financial stuff, but they're also grieving your loss. And this may not be something they want to do. So rather than assume that you're going to do something for each other as spouses or partners, you want to sit down and have that conversation of, is this really something you want to take on? We hope this doesn't happen for many years, but if it does, who should this be? Should it be another loved one so you don't have to do it? But the default for many attorneys is, oh, you just name each other if they see two people come in together. That doesn't have to be there. It's just, it's not a it is a default, but it shouldn't necessarily be. You can put a lot more thought into it. And if you're not married and you're not in a relationship with somebody, the question is, who do you then name? One of the things I tend to look at is how much older is the person than you? What's the likelihood that this person may predecease you? You may have picked somebody that was perfect and is going to do a great job, but if they're not around to do it, you need to create a line of successors, maybe two or three people that you also trust to do this and act in your best interest and take over. So, looking at your existing documents, if you have them, how many people do you have named? Who do you have named? Let's make sure there are no ex-spouses, ex-partners, ex-family members, which often happens because people don't look at their documents that often. So you want to have that conversation. And I think most important point, ask the people. Ask the people, are you okay doing this for me? Is this something you're okay taking on? Because if they're not, it's a lot tougher of a conversation down the road because they then have to resign and there's a lot more legalities to it than if they just say, I really appreciate you asking me. I'm honored, but I'm not able to, right? I'm not interested. And just having that transparency and having a conversation as a family group or as a friend group can be really important.
Definitely. And so, as you're thinking about your documents and getting the basics of your estate plan in place, now we want to partner that with your intentions and really be thinking about like the example I used earlier about my client with all of her neighbors, right? When you think about everything that you have, in the end, what is left over? Who or what is going to be the beneficiary of all of that? And then I also want you to be thinking about not just when you're no longer here, but in your lifetime. Are there people, organizations, family members that you would want to gift, that you would want to start to give to in your lifetime and not wait until you're no longer here? And so what we're able to do when and several clients are on this call, you know that we can map out a strategy for you for lifetime giving, whether that's charitable giving where you're going to get the charitable deduction every year, or it's just gifting to friends and family. The gift limit this year is $19,000 per person. So if you are a single person, you can give $19,000 to as many people as you can. If you are married together, you can each give $19,000. So you can double the gift to any individual. So just be thinking about what your intentions are, and then are your intentions clear in your documents as well as in the beneficiary forms that are attached to your life insurance policies, your investment accounts, your retirement accounts. So a couple of examples here. You're working with a client last year who was elderly and his wife had died, and he was sad. Like he was just grieving. And we are talking about updating his estate plan now that his wife was no longer part of the plan. And I could see how upset he was, and he had four nieces and nephews, and he said it was mine and my wife's intention to leave everything to the four of them. And I said to him, do you want to wait until you're no longer here? Or given how you're feeling right now and knowing what the intention was for you and your wife, would you want to do some of this gifting now? And so the four nieces and nephews were all in their 20s. And he said, I would need to think about that. And I said, well, just imagine, what would this gift mean to each of them? This was $18,000 per kid, at in their 20s. And so he thought about it and he said, I've made my decision. I want to incorporate the gifting for the four kids for our Thanksgiving dinner this year. And he wrote four of the most beautiful letters, handwritten letters, to each of the four kids, telling them who they mean to, like who they are in the world, and what they meant to him and his wife, and how much he loves them, and that he wants to give them a totally no strings attached gift to make their lives easier. And then each of these kids opened up this envelope and got $18,000. And it was more money than any of them had ever expected. And he'll be able to do this multiple times, but this was the first round of the gifting. And he said it was one of his favorite moments of his life to be able to see the impact that it had on them and just feel like he was really honoring his wife in his lifetime. So that's one example. As you're thinking about lifetime gifts, whether it's a one-time gift or over the course of time, who do you care about, or what do you care about? We have a friend who, she and her husband have no children, but three cats. And her cats are extremely important to them. And she calls them her kids. And she rescues older cats. And so when one passes away, they get another one. They always have two or three cats. But she has a very specific estate plan set up that they're very close friends. And those close friends have agreed that if something ever happened to her and her husband, whoever the pets are at that time, they will take them. But there's a dollar amount of money allocated to them for the perpetual care of the cats, the vet bills, the food, all of it. And it's significant. The cats will never use all this money, but she wanted her friends to know that this was a really important role, and that it was for her peace of mind to know that their pets would be taken care of in perpetuity, in that there would be the financial piece attached to it for them. So that's also something to think about, is when you're leaving behind or asking someone to take responsibility for something, make sure that there's some financial backup to that plan, because otherwise it can be a real burden. Many of you may be thinking about not just the gift of money or life insurance proceeds or home equity at some point when you're no longer here, but many of you have family vacation homes, lake houses, beach houses, the kinds of real estate that for many of you it's important for you to keep it in the family, keep it in perpetuity. And so when you leave something behind to family or friends, that is the gift, I'm putting that in air quotes, the gift of substantial real estate. Keep in mind that for some people, that's not a gift. It can be a real burden financially. Yes, it's wonderful that they have access to your beach house now, but if the taxes are $28,000 and it needs a new roof and there's a new assessment, or one of the new owners of your beneficiaries would like to be bought out of that property, this can really start to become stressful for people. It can be a burden. It can cause a lot of family fighting. And so let's not do that. right? As we're having this conversation today, start to think about, oh, we do have a beach house. What about changing the beneficiary of some of your assets to leave a chunk of money that goes with the house so that it's the lake house maintenance fund, and that it's substantial enough that if people can't afford to keep paying for the house, the account itself will do that. Or if somebody wants to be bought out, there's money in that account to help for that buyout. That's really strategic estate planning. And then it actually is a gift. So be thinking about that. If you have something that could potentially be a burden for someone, there is an easy way to work and build an account that's associated with that property that would help take care of it. And the other thing to think about in terms of your intentions for organizations, for your charitable giving, make sure that if you are intending to leave money behind charitably in the end, that it's really clear in your documents, that it's really clear which organizations, or maybe you just have a philosophy about the types of organizations that you like that money to be left to, but be really clear about it, because I've seen this so many times where older people will say, and I know the kids know my intentions. And then they pass away and the kids don't know their intentions, or their intentions have changed over time. And people want to fulfill your wishes, but it's got to be clear to them how to do that. So if you've got charitable intentions, we'll talk about beneficiary arrangements in just a few minutes. If you are leaving behind anything to charity, keep in mind how assets pass to people versus charity. Some assets are taxable to people and not taxable to charities. We'll talk about that in just a little bit. You can have any beneficiaries you want, any percentages for anyone, but we're going to also talk in just a bit about making sure you pair the right asset with the right organization or person. And I would highly recommend that as you're thinking about beneficiaries, to do so in percentage, not in dollar amounts. Because if you choose a specific dollar amount, we don't know how much is going to be left in the end, right? You might choose to leave Susie $50,000, and in the end you have 3 million left and she's left with this little teeny amount. Or you may choose these dollar amounts for a number of different people, and in the end there isn't enough money to leave those dollar amounts to everyone. And so percentages can last forever. And so when you're thinking about your intentions, what percent of your overall estate would you like that person or that organization to receive? So we'll talk about some taxes in just a moment. The other thing
I
to
could add, can I
yeah,
add for a
please.
moment?
Yeah,
Sorry.
please.
As you're saying charity and being really clear, one of the things that I saw as a mistake in drafting the documents is it would say to, like, let's say, for example, Community Foundation of Western Mass. Well, what if the Community Foundation, hopefully it's around in perpetuity, but what if it doesn't last until you have passed away? So, as part of that being clear, I would say to the Community Foundation or any organization that may follow. So, what if the name changes? We find that a lot of money goes left unclaimed because there's a very specific name to that charity and the name has changed. So that doesn't exist. So your beneficiaries can't, or your personal reps can't pass the money if it's a different name. So if you put in, or any organization this turns into, or something to that effect, it's going to make it a lot easier.
Yep, really, really good point. Right, because what seems to be true today, now we fast forward 30 years from now, it might not necessarily be exactly the same. And if you haven't taken the time to review your documents on a regular basis, this is a great time to do so.
Absolutely.
Couple of other things to consider in planning is some special considerations and or special needs. So you may have beneficiaries among your friends or family who have special needs, and they should, in some cases, should not be left money outright because it could have them be disqualified for benefits that they're receiving. Or there could be addiction issues, some issues for that person that if they were to receive money outright with no restrictions and no guidance, it could actually harm them, do more harm than good. So if you've got people that you are intending to leave money to, but they either shouldn't be receiving it outright, or it would be detrimental to them to be receiving a big lump sum, then there are ways that you can leave that money behind, as Catherine was saying earlier, with parameters, with restrictions, with some special instruction to make sure that it gets paid to them $3,000 per month instead of $300,000 up front. So just know that all of that, whatever those intentions are, or the concerns that you might have are for any particular people that you're leaving money to, all of that can be worked out in an estate plan. You just have to make sure that you're clear about those intentions. And Catherine kind of talks about when you go bowling, right? When you put those guardrails up, it sure makes it a lot easier to do well in your bowling game when there's no gutter balls and everything just stays straight on the path it's supposed to. This is how your estate plan can go. When you are really, really clear with instruction and having those guardrails, it's just a much better outcome for the beneficiary. So your clarity is going to be really important when you think about naming particular people or organizations. So I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to just talk about making sure that your goals and your estate plan is aligned with the assets that you have.
So picking up from there, and yes, the bumper and guardrail analogy absolutely is there because most of us have gone bowling, most of us have thrown a gutter ball or two in our time. So, thinking about that, you want to keep your heirs from making as many mistakes with your money as you can. So you may look at this and say, my heirs are totally financially responsible. They're very good stewards of money. And that's great, in which case you can leave things to them outright. But if you're leaving things to somebody who may end up with a divorce or somebody who may have kids that may inherit instead of them if they predecease you, this money can spread in a way that you wouldn't otherwise expect. So if you have one person where you're like, yep, this person's great, but if that money goes to somebody else instead of them, wouldn't it make sense to put some restrictions? Because we don't know how those other people who may take their place would be with money as you are confident about this one person. So looking at whether your documents are consistent with your beneficiary designations. A beneficiary designation is anything that's on a contract. So insurance, investment accounts, financial accounts, banks, anything where you're asked to write in a beneficiary. A beneficiary document trumps your will. So anytime you have a beneficiary, that person will inherit instead of the person who is named in your will. So if your estate plan says, for example, all outright to my niece, but your beneficiary designation says all outright to this ex-partner or ex-spouse that you had, the ex-spouse or ex-partner is getting everything, the niece is not, even though she's named in the will. So you can really, as much as you've done your planning, as much as you can do a beautiful estate plan with your attorney, what can torpedo that plan is what you've done with the beneficiary designations, because those people will inherit over the will. So you want to make sure they match. It is really important to go back and do an audit of all of your beneficiary designations. The things that we find the most that end up missing, and Amy, fill in too, because I'm sure you see this as well as I do, but 401k plans, old pension plans, anything from a previous employer that you've just held on to, potentially an old insurance policy. Those are probably the ones I see the most because you don't look at them all that often.
We just had this situation with a client. He's been divorced for 25 years. His beneficiary is his sister. He's in his 70s. And so I'm doing planning for him and for his sister. And I said, just confirming the IRA that you have had at the bank forever that has $900,000 in it. Who's the beneficiary? He said, my sister. I said, are you sure? He said, well, of course, I've been divorced for 25 years. Who else would it be? And so I said, well, let's call the bank. And we called the bank, and sure enough, his ex-wife. So, like Catherine was just saying, if he died unexpectedly, his sister is fully expecting a $900,000 inheritance, and it will fully go to his ex-wife. So, like, really, it's important to just make sure that, yes, you've done the documents, but now you have to go back and update each of the contracts, every life insurance policy, every IRA, every 401k, your group life insurance, like all of these things. Someday long ago, you named someone there. Let's make sure it's not your mom who passed away 10 years ago or someone you just don't like anymore. But we do see it more often than you would imagine.
Another one I see is people name pets. I have seen a few where people will name a pet as a beneficiary. And in Massachusetts, you are allowed to have a pet as a trust beneficiary. You can have a trust for a beloved pet, which many people do. And I did for mine when she was still with us. So no judgment there if you have multiple pet trusts or even one. Um, but you need to have a human being as an eventual beneficiary. So I could have the trust, it was the trust for Bailey. And then there were human beneficiaries if Bailey was no longer around. So when we set this up, that was possible. But if you leave it outright to someone who is not human, that beneficiary designation may or may not be honored. Most cases, no, it has to pass to a human. So the default would be your estate. So now you've taken a beneficiary designation, which would have passed immediately and seamlessly to a family member or a loved one, and put it into your estate for probate purposes, which is probably not what you were intending to do. You were intending to do a nice thing and have money to care for a pet, as Amy had said with her friend with her cats. So it's a wonderful thing to be able to do, to leave funds for a beloved pet, but you have to do it in the right way. And it's not just naming that pet a beneficiary. So I thought I would share that because I have
Mhm.
seen that as a mistake on some documents.
For sure. And like this, again, no judgment, right? This is why we're having this call, to be educational and to have you just double check everything you've got. So let's just talk about taxes for a moment, because this is a big mistake that we have seen in many different ways show up in people's plans, which is you've got the assets, you're well intentioned, you know who you love, but the beneficiaries are backwards. So here's what I mean by that. Typically, life insurance proceeds go to people tax free. Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks go to people tax free. Home equity typically goes to people tax free. 401k pre-tax money, IRA pre-tax money is 100% taxed as ordinary income to people. So if you're married, spouses can roll that money over to each other. But as soon as you leave it to anybody besides your federally married spouse, it is 100% taxable to people. And they have to take that money out within 10 years, and it's ordinary income on top of their ordinary income. So for some people, depending on their age and depending on their financial situation, they could be paying at a 51% tax because they're paying ordinary income federally, and they're paying for their state. So if they're in New York, they could be in a 37% tax bracket and a 10% New York tax and a New York City tax. Now we're talking more than 50% of that money that you worked really hard for could be taxed. And by the way, we're talking about just income taxes right now, not estate taxes. We'll get to that in a moment. So when you're thinking about who your beneficiaries are, consider the tax brackets of people. You know who's really successful and who's maybe working in a nonprofit, not earning a lot of money, might be in a lower tax bracket. So be mindful that if you're going to leave retirement dollars to someone in a high tax bracket, it is the worst money they can inherit besides nothing. But life insurance, home equity, Roth accounts can go to people no tax. So as you're thinking about your beneficiary planning and you're thinking about what percentages go to which people or which organizations, then you have to take it one step further and say, okay, for my charitable giving, I'm going to name the charity directly tied to my IRA, directly tied to my 401k. Because remember, a charity can be the recipient of that highly taxable retirement account, no tax. So now imagine if you just switched your beneficiaries and the highly taxable retirement account is going to go to charity and all the other better assets are going to go to your people. Now you might be leaving behind hundreds of thousands of dollars of extra money because it didn't go to taxes. And so be mindful. You could tell your financial advisor, tell your attorney and accountant what your intentions are. Then we want to look at each of the types of money you have and tie the right person or right organization to those things. And I would take it a step further too, because I know some of you on this call have been through this. If you are dealing with your elderly parents, and if you have some say in helping influence how they are spending their money, this is an important distinction. We see a lot of elderly people whose elderly accountants give them the advice, only take the required minimum distribution out of your retirement accounts. Why pay so much in taxes in your lifetime? Let's minimize your taxes. But the problem is for a lot of these elderly people, they're in super low tax brackets compared to you. The adult children might be in a much higher tax bracket. So what's happening is they're getting good accounting advice for themselves to minimize their own taxes, but they are leaving behind, they are maximizing your tax problem. And so if you can gently have that conversation and have a family conversation about their spending, it's often more beneficial for everyone if the elderly parents are spending down the retirement money at their tax bracket and leaving behind the better assets to you because you might be in a higher tax bracket. So we're going in both directions here, thinking, money that's coming to you and then money that you would be leaving to somebody else later. But something to really consider is the tax bracket of the recipient versus the tax bracket of the owner. And that can make a huge difference, huge difference. Keep in mind too that as you're doing your own planning and you're thinking about gifting in your lifetime, don't underestimate the gift that you can give directly from an IRA. If you are older than 70 and a half, you can give a significant amount of money to charity directly from your IRA, and it doesn't count as income. So if you're trying to reduce the size of your estate and you're charitably inclined, there are a couple of really specific things that we can help you do charitably that make a big difference in your taxes and then in reducing the size of your estate if charitable giving is important to you. Catherine, you're
And
going to
there,
say something? Yep.
I was just going to add in another option for charitable giving that can also be a tax efficient one is using a donor advised fund.
Mm-hmm.
So this is, and because this is an asset you can leave to your heirs. So as you were talking about charitable giving and having families continue the giving pattern of the loved ones that they've lost, if you leave a donor advised fund with instructions, this is an account you can set up either at a charity or with a financial institution. And it's an account that every dollar you spend out of that account that goes to a charity is going to be not taxable. The money goes in there after tax, it grows tax free like a Roth IRA. And as long as it comes out for a charity, it's not taxed. So that is an asset that you can also put money into in a year that you want to lower your income taxes during your lifetime. And then leave that as an asset to your kids to continue your good works. So they can then continue your philanthropy, even if they're not able to do it on the same level you were. That's able to help them increase the charitable giving on your behalf and help their good works continue. So that can be
I
another way to go.
I love this idea. We have clients, she and her wife are extremely charitable. They're in their 70s. They give a lot of money away. They have a lot of nieces and nephews, and they want to teach them to be charitable. So each year, they have a significant donor advised fund. Each year they sit down at the holidays, and each of the nieces and nephews are able to give away a certain amount of money from their donor advised fund, but they can choose the charity. And so she kind of takes requests from all the kids, and then they make all of those gifts around the holidays. But the kids know that when they both pass away, that donor advised fund, that bucket, they want them to continue doing this, and they're teaching them how to do it in their lifetime. Um,
Such a wonderful multi-generational
love,
strategy. I
love.
love that.
Leela, you raised your hand. If you want to unmute, feel free to ask your question.
Thank you. And my question is, the donor advisor fund, can it be distributed among, not just US globally?
Oh, yes. Yep. As long as it's a 501c3, as long as it's a registered nonprofit, it can certainly be global. You just want to make sure that when you establish the donor advised fund and you go in to do any grant making from it, you have to look up the organization and make sure that they're already listed there. But yes, it doesn't have to be just US.
So whoever they're directing the money to, it has to be registered as a nonprofit on the other end?
Correct. Yep. So any nonprofit can receive money from your donor advised fund.
Let us say, for example, any college or school,
Yes.
um, I don't know whether it would be registered in other countries, but can they do it?
Oh, great question. If it's a college or university, I'm assuming that would be the case, even if it's in another country. But I would say worth looking at. So, for example, Fidelity Charitable is one of the largest places that you can establish a donor advised fund. You could go to the Fidelity Charitable website and look up that, whatever school you're thinking of to see if it's one of the recipients already listed.
Okay.
Yeah, great question though. Okay, so just a couple of other things to make sure that we point out, and then we'll open up for questions for anybody. As you are thinking about planning in your lifetime, just know that everything can change, right? So as you're thinking about beneficiaries, as you're thinking about the people you care about and love, we just had a situation with one of my clients. She and her partner, um, they have, they basically have a pact among their friends. They have a group of friends. None of them have their own children, and they have a pact that says we're going to take care of each other until the last of us is gone. And so one of their friends was terminally ill, diagnosed last summer with cancer. And her dying wish was to just to die at home, to stay at home. And so these women all rallied, and for about 16 weeks, around the clock, took care of her. Yes, they had hospice coming in and doing the clinical work, but to just be with her and take care of her, this core group of women did all of that work. What they didn't know, so she passed away in the fall. And what they didn't know is that during that process, she had met with her attorney to update her estate plan. And she ended up changing the beneficiaries on a significant portion of her net worth to all of her caregivers. And so each of them ended up getting a distribution from her estate, completely unexpected. And they did this because they love her, and that this is their arrangement with one another. But it was such a cool thing. They each got $87,000. And she said it was so unexpected. And they together are now kind of looking at pooling this money together to keep it going, to keep taking care of one another. But again, like, it was a last minute wish that she had. It was able to be executed beautifully. It was a total surprise. And so just know that if you're having last minute decisions, or geez, this is a new friend that's significant to me, or I'd really like to change the big picture plan and add some people that might never expect it, but I'd love to have a little surprise for them. You can always make those changes. You just want to make sure that you're coordinating the estate documents along with the specific beneficiaries named on your other accounts. Because your will could say, leave it to my neighbor Barbara. But if nothing else changes on the other side, on your insurance or on your investments, that money might not go to Barbara. It's got to also be coordinated on both sides. So, a lot of people need help just coordinating this with their attorneys, accountants, and financial advisors. And we do this all the time. So if anyone has specific questions about your own particular situation, by all means, feel free to reach out to us. We can certainly help you. All right. Go ahead, Catherine.
I was just going to add to that, making sure that all of your documents match. So if you've been divorced, looking at that one, if you've been divorced, in many states, you are required, let's say you want an ex-spouse to continue to inherit. It's a friendly separation, but for whatever reason, you want them to continue to inherit. You need to do beneficiary designation documents again after the divorce is filed, especially if you're in Massachusetts. Because in Massachusetts, the rule is that if you don't do the documents again after the divorce is finalized, they're considered to be not eligible beneficiaries once that divorce is final. So we had this happen with a client of ours where he wanted to leave money to his ex-wife, and his kids were in their early 20s and they were beneficiaries, contingent beneficiaries after his ex-wife. And he passed away unexpectedly a few weeks after the divorce was finalized.
Mm.
And she went to file the claim, and the claim was denied because they said she was an ineligible beneficiary because they had not done the documents again. They had not done her beneficiary designation again after. So just something to think of as we think about making sure, as Amy said, everything matches. If you want to leave people on there that may otherwise be legally declared ineligible, you need to make that change. And you need to just be careful to keep that up to date.
And that's where that letter of intent can be really helpful, because
Absolutely.
you might name some people as beneficiaries and your family might go, I don't know if she really meant to do that. Are we really sure? But if you've got a letter that's crystal clear, like my client who wrote the letter of intent and wrote about what each of those neighbors meant to her, that when they ultimately got their inheritance, very unexpected inheritance, it came with the letter. So they knew what they meant to her, and the two nephews who perhaps had been expecting 50-50 from her, it was crystal clear that it was really her intention. So just know that that document can be pretty powerful. I do want to comment on estate taxes. So we could have an entire conversation just about taxes, but just to be clear, we talked about ordinary income taxes. There's also capital gains taxes on some investments. But what we didn't talk about today is estate taxes, which are federal, and then state estate taxes. So just know that as you're doing your planning, there are a lot of taxes to take into consideration. Right now, the federal estate tax exemption is about $14 million per individual. So if you're single, you can have up to $14 million in your estate when you die. And that's everything you own, added all up, real estate, investments, life insurance contracts, all of it. If you don't have more than $14 million, then you would not be subject to the federal estate tax. However, in Massachusetts, where we're located, we have a state estate tax for anything over $2 million. That's very different than 14 million. And so you might not be subject to federal estate taxes when you pass away, but you may be subject to state estate taxes. So all of these things are really important to understand and work with your financial planner and your accountant on them, because there are ways to move assets out of your name, move things into trust, and do some elder law planning as you get older to deliberately reduce the size of your estate. You can also give more away charitably in your lifetime, reduce the size of your estate. You can do gifting to individuals, $19,000 per person, as many times as you can per year. That's another thing that you can do to reduce the size of your estate, both on the federal side and on the state side. So that's where you see people doing a lot of trust planning in later years when you don't need control over all of it. If you're okay moving your house into a trust, giving yourself lifetime access to live there, but when you die, the $1 million asset is not included in your estate because you had moved it over into a trust and gotten it out of your estate. So there's some very creative things that you can do from an estate planning perspective and a gifting perspective to reduce your estate deliberately to reduce the size of the tax.
Another
Kathy?
thing you can choose to do as well is if you say, no, let's say you are over that 14 million mark, you could say everything to my heirs up to the amount of the estate tax, everything I need to reduce my estate tax to zero to charity.
Yes.
And then list the charities. And we've seen people do that. It's a wonderful way to do it, where you know your heirs are going to get a set amount of money, and everything over and above that goes back to a charity. So
Love
I
that.
also just wanted to add that the estate tax is set to change this year. There is a Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017 that is set to sunset. If nothing changes between now and December 31st, the estate tax exemption is going to drop back to between 5 and 7 million, because it's supposed to be 5 indexed for inflation, but they haven't done the inflation calculations, which is why I say 5 to 7 index for inflation. So if you're thinking, wow, 14 million per person, that's way higher than I need to worry about. But if it drops down to 5, that may be something you might be a little more concerned about. This is where you're going to make sure you want to stay in contact with your advisor this year, with your attorney, because you can do some gifting to reduce the size of your estate prior to that happening that you might want to consider, given this significant difference in the estate tax change.
Definitely. And I would add this other unusual advice. And this, I'm just going to say it. So when you are doing your own planning, whether you're a single person or partnered, and you don't have children who would be the obvious people to handle your affairs when you're no longer here, I would really encourage you to take on the creative writing project of writing your own obituary. When you leave this burden, and I call it a burden, when you leave this burden to someone who may not know all of the milestones that you've had in life, may not know how to go back and recap all of those highlights and all the things that you would want people to remember about you, it's just hard for someone to put that together, and not only put it together, but put it together within 24 to 48 hours after you've passed, because the funeral home is looking for that information. I would recommend, and we've done this in our own planning, and I'm 53, but to sit down and I call it my obituary so far. And there's just, everything's documented. The things that I want people to remember me for, the people I care about, like how I want that to be written, it's already in existence so that someone can just take it and update it. But when you sit down, or if you and your partner sit down and do this together, it can really be, I call it a walk down memory lane. It can really be a great way to just look back on your lifetime of accomplishments and just capture what is important to you, and then leave it in a folder, leave it somewhere with your personal representative so someone knows where to find that at some point. But it's a wonderful exercise to go through yourself, and then share it with the appropriate people so that someone else doesn't have to take on that burden after the fact. And it's, if you've got your favorite nieces or nephews or a best friend, it's a really lovely thing to do with someone else too. So I just put it out there. People have been surprised by how great the process was to do that in their own lifetime. All right, if there's any other questions, now is a great time to ask those, as we just wrap up with a couple of final ideas for you. So, as we talked today, this was not to solve everyone's issues and answer all questions, but this was really just to create a big picture brainstorming for you to look back on your own plan and say, what needs to be changed? What new ideas did you get from today? And what have you been avoiding taking care of that now might be the prompt to have you go ahead and do that? So updating your documents to reflect your current wishes is really important. And then coordinating those beneficiary audits with all of your investment accounts, your real estate, and your insurance contracts to make sure that you have people named that you still like, who are still alive, that you are still married to, and that still fit into the consistent plan that you want to have across the board for all of your things. And then, Catherine, you want to just speak one more time to ethical wills?
Or I would say, to add to everything else, make sure you write your ethical will. Consider that letter of intention that goes with the standard will to create this more thoughtful, more clear path for your personal representative to follow. And then if you feel comfortable, we've talked about transparency all the way through the last hour, sharing things with family, sharing things with parents, with loved ones, talking about the people that we've named, talking to them to let them know they've been named to this really important role in your life. But make sure you're sharing your letter of intention as well with those family members, and have a family conversation. Transparency and clarity around finances and estate planning, we know, can be a touchy subject, but it can be a really important one if done correctly, and it can forestall lots of family arguing that could take place when you're not around.
I'll end with this quick story. We recently had a situation with the adult kids are our clients, and we were asking them about their parents' plan. And she said, I don't know, and I don't want to ask. I would never want to bring up the subject of death and dying, and I certainly would never want my parents to think I'm like snooping around about my inheritance. And this is a woman in her 50s. Well, we get referred to her parents, and I said, have you had the conversation with your kids? Oh my goodness, no. We would never want to have the conversation about death and dying with them, and we wouldn't want to upset them by talking about future inheritance. And so just know that everybody wishes they were having this conversation and no one's having it with each other. So your elderly parents are waiting for you to ask the question. You are waiting politely for them to bring it up. And in the meantime, nothing is being accomplished. So be the brave person. Bring it up. Don't bring it up at Thanksgiving, but bring it up at an appropriate time, or just offer that we'd like to schedule a time to sit with you and talk through our sort of family finances when you feel comfortable, but just know that we are comfortable and ready to have that conversation with you. I promise you, it's such an icebreaker for elderly people who really want to share their legacy, their intentions, and don't know when it's appropriate, and you can just open that door. So we'll end on that. For anyone who wants to share this information with friends, the recording will be available in a couple of days. So you'll be able to go to our website and share the link to this recording with anyone that you think could benefit from it. Catherine, thank you for your wisdom and knowledge, and just being such an accessible person. You take complicated things and make them understandable for people. So I appreciate you.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you having me. It's a lot of fun. It's a great topic to talk about, one that I think everybody should be thinking and talking about. So bringing it to your clients and advisors you work with. It's such a wonderful idea.
Thank you.
Happy to be
Thanks.
part of it.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks everyone for participating. Appreciate your attention. And you will be back in the fall with a philanthropy webinar to talk about charitable giving strategies. So looking forward to seeing you all again in a couple of months. Thank you.
Everyone.